So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure and honor to invite you today to this side event on coping with environmental challenges, climate and biodiversity action in UNESCO sites. This high-level political forum is an opportunity for us to dialogue with one another and to share with each other the actions, activities undertaken by partners and member states on how they are coping with environmental challenges, climate and biodiversity action in UNESCO sites. So this forum and platform today brings together eminent personalities, excellencies, ministers, who are going to share with us their actions and activities in their regions, in their countries, and how they're coping with environmental challenges, climate and biodiversity action. I am delighted to open this event here today, and I would like to give you a very short overview from the UNESCO Director General, Madam Audrey Azoulay. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, although the COVID pandemic has shown since more than ever that when we are faced with unexpected challenges, it can only be solved by working together. And this pandemic has really changed the daily life of all of us, and we're having to cope with this new normal. But 2020 still proved to be one of the 3 warmest years on record, with increasing levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, driving more extreme weather, ice melt, sea level rise, ocean acidification. As there is no vaccine against climate change, the future can be even more devastating. Therefore, concerted climate action should not be underestimated amid the sharp focus on economic and industrial downturns. Considering these challenges, therefore, the current situation highlights that our world is strongly interconnected and interlinked, and that transformation is paramount to reach a sustainable path. More than ever, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we understand that halting biodiversity erosion and climate adaptation and mitigation are critical to support human life. This year is a crucial year for long-term political objectives. Climate change and biodiversity are at the top of the global policy agenda. The UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration were just launched, and UNESCO is strongly involved and actively engaged in all of these different initiatives that were launched by the United Nations. At the end of this year, the 196 parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity will also discuss the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and decide on new targets. Furthermore, during the UN Climate Conference, the 196 parties will also commit to a more ambitious nationally determined contributions to be in line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement to limit global warming well below 2 degrees, preferably 1.5, compared to pre-industrial levels. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for UNESCO too, 2021 is a special year. This year, UNESCO celebrates its 75th birthday. The Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, hosted by UNESCO, commonly known as IOC, the only body of its kind in the United Nations, celebrates 60th anniversary, and the Man and the Biosphere program celebrates 50 years this year. The Intergovernmental Hydrological Program celebrates more than 50 years of its existence. Dear colleagues, what we need now are solutions to address the global challenges we are all facing, and UNESCO is at the forefront to promote sustainable solutions, particularly through its network of sites, designated sites, World Heritage Sites, natural heritage sites, biosphere reserves, and global geoparks. And also, UNESCO is committed to address these global challenges through its international and intergovernmental scientific programs. UNESCO has its unique global network of more than 2,000 designated sites, 1,121 World Heritage Sites, 714 biosphere reserves in 129 countries, and 169 global geoparks distributed all over the world actually cover 6% of the Earth's landmass. These sites are important models for building resilience to climate change and are well aligned with the recommendation of the IPBES and IPCC report. Through its UNESCO designated sites, UNESCO is accelerating local sustainable solutions through participatory governance and the combination of the natural sciences, the social sciences, humanities, education, culture, and communication, but also by providing policy guidance to its member states on the impacts of climate change and the best adaptation mitigation measures possible, suitable to local circumstances. As we are celebrating the 50th year of the Man in the Biosphere program, this program has in fact been a very pioneering and visionary program that was established in 1971 in order to enhance relationship between people and the environments in a scientific framework. Each biosphere reserve is a unique site. Covering today 740 and 129 countries, they showcase solutions for transformation in line with the Sustainable Development Goals and represent an enormous and concrete effort carried out by the member states and their citizens in a multi-stakeholder approach. In 2021, as we celebrate the 50th year of the anniversary, above all, the commitment of millions of women and men and children who make up the body, the soul, and the spirit of the biosphere reserves. Since its creation in 1971, the program has paved a way for a vision that in a renewed relationship between humans and the environment is an opportunity to reconcile restoration, preservation, conservation, development, to transmit the full potential of life to future generations. And 50 years on, these 714 biosphere reserves, and including 21 transboundary sites, build peace between nations, demonstrating the commitment of our member states to open up different spaces of harmony between human beings and the environment. So more than 5% of the terrestrial surface is actually covered by the biosphere reserves themselves, in which today more than 260 million people call biosphere reserves their home. These men and women who have decided to commit themselves to their territory in a respectful way in order to seek solutions to global challenges. But there's also the scientific community, which through its research collects and analyzes data so we can better understand our planet, our ecosystem services, the diversity and interactions with human beings. They're also the decision makers who, through policies taken at national and local level, are promoting actions to direct the territories towards sustainability. Through the interface of education, the natural sciences, the social sciences, culture, communication, and information, UNESCO is addressing needs to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, culture in all its forms can serve as a key source for climate change adaptation and mitigation. UNESCO is the only UN body which is committed to promoting cultural diversity and respect for and among people. Culture as a mandate of UNESCO is extremely important today, and UNESCO is actively mobilized to address the impact of climate change on culture and promote its role for climate action. Culture is an indispensable tool for climate mitigation, as cultural heritage, natural heritage, and creativity can all contribute to addressing the root causes of climate change. Natural heritage sites are key to protecting biodiversity and mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. Ensuring the conservation of these sites, particularly through traditional community-based management practices, must be a vital part of climate change mitigation strategies. And culture is also crucial for inspiring behavioral change and innovative climate solutions while integrating a concern for the environment into cultural policies. This can reduce the carbon footprint for the creative economies that we all wish for. The Intergovernmental Hydrological Program of UNESCO, which is the only intergovernmental hydrological program, envisions a water-secure world where people and institutions have adequate capacity and scientifically based knowledge for informed decisions on water management and governance to attain sustainable development and to build resilient societies tested and validated within the UNESCO designated sites. Now, these sites really focus on preserving the natural heritage, biodiversity restoration, conservation, and sustainable development through interdisciplinary and participatory approaches. There are also means to provide a training for youth empowerment because intergenerational equity, intergenerational solidarity is critical and at the heart of our work as we advocate for future and building a formidable community of values whose goal is harmonious life on Earth with respect for living things. So conserving the harmony of ecosystems and resilience to climate change are really at the heart of UNESCO's designated sites. UNESCO brings together in this holistic manner the education, the science, culture, and communication to build on a new relationship with nature, an alliance for peace with nature and for nature. I therefore welcome you all to the side event. We have a rich program for the next 90 minutes, and I wish you fruitful insights and discussions. And thank you very much for joining us in this opening session. For coping strategies, coping with climate and environmental challenges through action, not only in our sites, but also hearing from our distinguished speakers who will be sharing with us the initiatives on the ground. Thank you very much. We will now proceed, if I may, Madam Chair, thank you, on the introduction, which is part 1, addressing climate change and biodiversity from the scientific perspective. Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, it really gives me great pleasure today to introduce to you 2 distinguished speakers, Professor Hans Otto Portner and Dr. David Obura. Professor Hans Otto Portner, who probably is no stranger to all of you, he's professor and head of the Department of Integrative Ecophysiology in Germany. He was the co-chair of the Scientific Steering Committee of the IPBES IPCC co-sponsored workshop, and he is currently the co-chair of the Working Group 2 for the 6th assessment cycle of IPCC. He was co-chair of the Scientific Steering Committee, and his research interests include the effects of climate warming, ocean acidification on marine animals and ecosystems. Thank you, Professor Hans Otto, for being with us here today. I would also like to introduce Dr. David Obura, also no stranger to our world. David Obura is a founding director of and works at Cordio, East Africa in Mombasa in Kenya. And Cordio is a knowledge organization supporting sustainability of the coral reef and the marine systems in the Western Indian Ocean. David Obura's primary research is on coral reef resilience, in particular to climate change. He's also a biogeography, especially the biogeography of the Indian Ocean. He was an invited expert for IPBES and IPCC. I will now give the floor to Professor Hans Otto Portner to start to talk about the co-benefits of biodiversity protection and climate action, insights from the IPBES IPCC workshop, first intervention presentation by both of you, and I thank you very much for highlighting the role and interlinkages. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to be able to join you and talk to you about our workshop report that we have produced, the first ever collaboration between IPBES and IPCC in history, and I hope there will be more to come. So my name is Hans Portner. I'm co-chair of IPCC Working Group 2 and have been co-chair of this co-sponsored workshop and its report. And together with David Obura, it's my pleasure to provide a short overview of our key findings. Can I have the next slide, please? The report deals with 3 intertwined systems: the changing climate system, the changing biosphere, where we currently see accelerating loss of biodiversity, and the human society, which is going through its own inherent crises, such as the current pandemics and associated challenges. Climate change and biodiversity loss are threatening human well-being as well as society. They are closely interconnected. and they share common drivers through human activities. They are reinforcing each other and are intertwined through mechanistic links and feedbacks. And I will start with a brief look into those. Nature already absorbs more than 50% of anthropogenic CO2 emissions through carbon storage in biomass and organic material, as well as through a CO2 dissolution in ocean water. Relevant parts of this service are provided by the underpinning biodiversity. But biodiversity is at risk from ecosystem degradation resulting from human activities, including human-induced climate change. Ecosystem degradation, in fact, enhances greenhouse gas emissions and therefore climate change. Next slide, please. So what is already happening? We are seeing multiple impacts of climate change on all continents and in all ocean regions. These increasingly add to the enormous human pressure on biodiversity, which is causing its progressive loss. So far, conservation efforts have not been sufficient to stop these developments. The surface currently subjected to ambitious conservation is simply too small to stem the loss of biodiversity on a global scale. Human society depends on the services that nature provides, but climate change causes loss in natural resources, especially those that are overused, for example, by overfishing. It also causes losses through excessive droughts, and it causes mortalities in heat waves and in excessive wildfires, not only among animals and plants, but also in, and we are increasingly aware of that, in the human population. The next slide, please. Climate change and biodiversity loss are two of the most pressing issues of the Anthropocene. Depending on the degree of climate change, we are expecting dramatic climate-induced changes in terrestrial and marine ecosystems. The schematic on the top right indicates that impacts are related to the specialization of all species on limited temperature ranges, as indicated by the so-called thermal performance curve. It reflects the ability of species to grow and, last not least, also to store carbon and help mitigation. This curve is dynamic as it responds to additional drivers such as acidification and hypoxia in the ocean. This curve also shapes the biogeography of species. Many species, virtually everywhere, are on the move because they stay at their preferred temperatures. Drastic changes are projected at the low latitudes, as indicated by the widening of the grayish belt caused by global warming from 2 degrees at the top to 4 degrees, and the associated drop in species richness. This concerns mostly the higher complex organisms such as animals and plants, which have lower levels of heat tolerance than most other organisms, and that includes humans as well in terms of having lower levels of heat tolerance. An immediate conclusion is that maintaining biodiversity and its functioning relies on phasing out emissions from the burning of fossil fuels. Next slide, please. As a proof of concept, you see on this slide that actually this biodiversity loss at the lowest latitudes is already kicking in. For all marine species here, for pelagic as well as benthic, you see this dip in the center at 0 degrees latitude, which is related to the temperature extremes experienced in those areas. And if we look at the findings from the paleo and also from the present and the respective analyses in the literature, we see that there seems to be a temperature optimum for biodiversity, which is close to 20 degrees, slightly lower than 20 degrees, and there is a slight decline in biodiversity at temperatures beyond. Next slide, please. Nature's contributions to people also include carbon binding and storage by the forests on the planet, thereby helping climate mitigation. But the capacity of plants to bind CO2 also depends on temperature. The reddish color on these two globes shown here indicates that in the top globe, even in current climates, the optimum temperature for this process is surpassed during certain months of the year. And the bottom globe tells us that by the 2040s, this trend is exacerbated with further warming, and this effect is unavoidable. And next slide, please, or thank you. The inset here on the right-hand side shows the plant productivity curve across latitudes. This productivity curve in the bluish line is related to the current climate, and then the red and orange lines are indicating how this productivity will be going down across latitudes with further warming. And this relates also to the surface area where vegetation cannot keep up such performance, and this area will be increasing. At the same time, degradation processes, such as of permafrost, will release CO2 and methane and contribute to emissions. Again, ambitious emissions reduction are a precondition to stop these trends and to enable to help mitigate climate change. Next slide, please. Plant life is already in use to help mitigation, but actions taken to mitigate climate change can have either beneficial or harmful effects on biodiversity, depending on policy. Ignoring the inseparable nature of climate, biodiversity, and human quality of life will result in non-optimal solutions to either crisis. For example, on the left-hand side, you see how planting bioenergy crops in monocultures on large shares of land can be damaging to biodiversity and may actually compromise food security for people. Whereas conversely, restoring natural ecosystems such as mangroves, seagrass meadows, forests, peatlands, grasslands, and savannas enhances carbon storage and benefits biodiversity and people. And with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague, David Obura, to talk about the high-level conclusions from these findings.
Thank you very much, Hans. And so I'll take over here speaking as an ecologist. Of course, we've worked in conservation for many years, and we've just heard about UNESCO sites working very strongly in this domain and with benefits to people from nature. And one of the big tasks that we had in the workshop was to assess the positive interactions, the reciprocal interactions between climate and biodiversity actions that are mutually supportive. Now, thank you. So we have that conserving biodiversity supports adaptation to climate change. And this was a very strong finding. Biodiversity assists people and ecosystems to adapt to climate change. And actions that halt, slow, or reverse biodiversity loss can also help to mitigate climate change. An emerging conclusion from scientific assessments is that we need to support intact and fully functional habitats under climate change and halt biodiversity loss. To achieve these, we need around 30 to 50% of the world's ocean and land to be effectively conserved. Now, there are many different models for how this conservation can occur, and increasingly, of course, we recognize that 50% of intact natural space is under the control of indigenous peoples and local communities. And there's emerging work on development of definitions and guidance on other effective conservation measures so that we can really understand what is really effective conservation and sustainable actions on the ground. There are many agroecological systems that support biodiversity. And of course, there are many practices that do not. And so distinguishing these actions one from the other is very important. But even then, the actions that nature can do to mitigate climate change are weakened without strong action on carbon emissions. And already many UNESCO World Heritage and Biosphere sites with coral reefs, for example, in the system that I work in, we know are threatened by climate change. I can have the next slide, please. A big component of what we looked at then moving forward is that understanding that people's interactions with nature occur across the full gradient from highly intact to highly transformed system, that it's important to integrate conservation, climate, and societal actions across this whole gradient. These three areas act as coupled systems, and understanding how to improve actions across these systems is key to successful actions. These need to go hand in hand and across full landscapes and incorporate actions in cities as well as in rural areas. New studies are showing how the role of pockets of fully functioning natural habitats across all land and seascapes, how these can assist in climate migration for how species and ecosystems can adapt to a changing climate, at the same time providing valuable benefits to people, such as pollination, wild foods and medicines, and temperature, shade, and rainfall regulation. And to be of benefit to all people, these pockets of nature really need to extend down to the most local scales where people live and work. And of course, the relevance to UNESCO sites of all types is very high across these multifunctional scapes, as we called them in the report. And I think I heard the Assistant Director General, Madame Ner Bedouel, mentioning the number of 260 million people affected by UNESCO sites around the world. So this is a tremendous resource of natural landscapes and seascapes that can really make a difference in the climate biodiversity nexus. I can have the next slide, please. So there are many trade-offs that have to be considered, and integrating conservation, climate, and societal actions is a great challenge. Nature offers solutions which can be effective if paralleled by strong emissions reductions and vice versa. And these effective conservation, climate, and societal actions need to go hand in hand. Now, this graphic shows on the top the effect of climate actions on the left, on biodiversity actions on the right, and in the bottom graphic, the reverse, the effect of biodiversity actions on climate actions on the right. So some climate actions, in particular ecosystem across ecosystem, food, and energy buckets, may have negative impacts on nature, particularly the wrong type of afforestation. And this was monocultures or planting trees where forests shouldn't be, and energy solutions such as bioenergy crops, which we highlighted in an earlier slide, or perhaps hydropower that is not well planned. But we did find that most nature-based actions, and you can see that there's a lot more red lines on the top graphic than there are on the bottom graphic, and the blue lines are good from one side to the other, and the red lines are bad. But most nature-based actions have positive impacts on climate across the board. Whether we're protecting what exists in place, restoring what is lost, managing use, such as in agriculture, fisheries, and also transforming regulatory and economic systems to benefit nature. I can have the next slide, please. We identified that there are many pathways of sustainable development that can work for ecosystems and people. Now, nature can do a lot, but it cannot do everything. And the regulatory systems and our governance systems need to transform and adapt to make positive outcomes possible. There are pathways of development that can successfully navigate through the multiple crises we face. But a key message we found is that the later these good decisions are made, or the later that these positive actions are prioritized, the more costly it is to improve conditions later, and the final outcome is also not as good, or takes longer to get to it if you delay the decision. So transformative governance through effective incentives and capacity building, cooperation across sectors and jurisdictions, preemptive actions, adaptive and inclusive decision-making, and strong environmental law and policy are essential pieces of the puzzle to deliver on this climate and biodiversity positive future. And the next slide, please. And so finally, learning from this and earlier reports from both IPBES and IPCC, we conclude that successful implementation depends on rapid entry into action. Three essential components of this are ambitious emissions reductions from fossil fuels, restoring a resilient biosphere and biodiversity, and addressing justice and equality in eradicating poverty. And overall, every bit of warming matters, and every lost species and degraded ecosystem matters. And we need to act and put actions in place as soon as possible. And so with that, the final slide, I'll say thank you very much. It was an honor and a pleasure to work on this report with both institutions and to present it to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Obura. Hello, thank you. Thank you very much to our distinguished experts, Professor Hans Otto Portner and Dr. David Obura. Really, you have put your fingers on the pulse, as we would say, and open this meeting with exceptional presentations, an overview of the report. I do hope that we have a number of our excellent ambassadors, member states listening in on this, and will be taking home good examples and good practices from your work. So thank you very much for these excellent presentations, and we're looking forward to working with you as well and ensuring that we can continue to work for nature. And we have taken a couple of notes here that nature is offering solutions, but it cannot do everything. And we do need some transformative changes to take place. And perhaps we could come to that later on in the questions and answers. So thank you both very much for your contributions. Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we will now continue with some insights from our distinguished speaker called Dr. Paula Cristina Sierra Correa. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Paula. You will provide us some information and insights on marine ecosystems, as you can see from a beautiful slide which has been put up on the role of marine and coastal ecosystems, and are these ignored? Dr. Paula Cristina Sierra is actually the leader of the European Union Action on Mangrove, Seagrasses and Local Communities in the Caribbean. She's also head of research and information in the Columbia Marine and Coastal Research Institute. She was a member of the editorial board of the Global Ocean Science Report 2020 and has a lot of interesting ideas and thoughts to share with us, but also recommendations. Dr. Paula Cristina, the floor is yours, ma'am. Over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Muchísimas gracias a ustedes por invitarme. Es un placer para mí acompañarlos hoy en este importante evento y hoy quiero llamar la atención sobre el papel que juegan los ecosistemas marinos y costeros, su diversidad, no solamente la diversidad biológica, sino también cultural y sus servicios en torno a los asuntos del cambio climático. Siguiente, por favor. Siguiente. Aquí para hacer un breve recuento sobre cuáles son las características claves de nuestros océanos. Tenemos que entender que los océanos son más del 70% de este planeta que hemos denominado planeta Tierra, que tal vez debería llamarse planeta Océanos, y contienen el 97% del agua disponible en nuestro planeta si tomamos en cuenta además la craiosfera que tenemos en nuestros polos. Todos en el planeta dependemos de los océanos y alrededor de 4.7 billones de dólares en infraestructura están expuestos anualmente a inundaciones. Más alrededor de 700 millones de personas viven en las zonas más bajas de las zonas costeras y de estos 65 millones en las zonas insulares, que son las más vulnerables, y alrededor del 10% de estas poblaciones son indígenas o son poblaciones muy vulnerables. El CO2 además está causando grandes impactos. Tenemos el calentamiento de los océanos, tenemos la acidificación, tenemos la pérdida de oxígeno en el océano y, por supuesto, el cambio en el ciclo de nutrientes y en la producción primaria. Y está previsto que para el 2050, en estas proyecciones, alcancemos a tener alrededor de 1 billón de personas en zonas bajas, en zonas costeras. Es decir, se incrementará aún más la posibilidad de estar afectados. Asimismo, la biodiversidad se ve afectada en sus múltiples niveles tróficos y además se observan cambios no solamente en la composición de las especies, sino también en la biogeografía, los lugares que ocupan en el planeta. El estrés que hay sobre la biodiversidad no es solo exacerbado por los eventos climáticos, sino también por los no climáticos. Y si continuamos así, pues los riesgos, como dice el informe global de riesgos, seguirán aumentando. Si nos damos cuenta, hace millones de años las cianobacterias propiciaron el oxígeno que nos permite hoy a los seres humanos. Yo creo que hay que hacernos la pregunta si los seres humanos con las emisiones CO2 estamos propiciando la atmósfera para que otra especie ocupe nuestro lugar. Creo que el planeta puede sobrevivir sin el ser humano, pero nosotros no podemos sobrevivir sin la biodiversidad. Siguiente, por favor. Siguiente. Los servicios ecosistémicos que los podemos clasificar en servicios de provisión, de soporte, culturales y de regulación. Siguiente. Y en el de regulación es el que más cobra relevancia en este momento cuando hablamos de esa interacción entre la biodiversidad y el cambio climático. Siguiente. Y la próxima, por favor. Y aquí lo que quiero llamar la atención es que hay un conector esencial, como lo dice el IPBES y el IPCC, entre la biodiversidad y el cambio climático, y es el carbono. Los cambios en la temperatura y en el CO2 alteran el ciclo del carbono. Y el 80% o más del ciclo del carbono circula a través de los océanos. Ambos, las emisiones de CO2, pero también la poca capacidad que están teniendo nuestros sistemas para remover ese carbono de la atmósfera, afectan a nuestros ecosistemas. Sin embargo, los ecosistemas marinos y costeros han lidiado bien con este tema. Los ecosistemas como los manglares, los pastos marinos, hoy denominados ecosistemas carbono azul, se encuentran en casi todo el planeta, excepto en la Antártica, y son excelentes secuestrando el carbono que hay en la atmósfera, alrededor del 10% anual. Sin embargo, están expuestos a grandes presiones. Algunos de estos ecosistemas se encuentran localizados en los sitios designados por la UNESCO, en especial las reservas de biosfera. Y aquí es clave entender que un planeta saludable será también resiliente, y al ser resilientes nuestros océanos, pues preservaremos también nuestros servicios. Para todos ustedes es conocido que el año pasado, en noviembre, nuestra reserva de biosfera Seaflower en el Caribe sufrió el impacto de 2 huracanes consecutivos de categoría 5, el huracán ETA y el huracán Iota. El 90% de la infraestructura de la isla de Providencia desapareció. Sin embargo, los ecosistemas de manglares, de pastos marinos y los corales soportaron los altos impactos del oleaje y de los vientos, reduciendo la energía de los mismos y previniendo muertes humanas. Es hoy urgente que esos sitios de la UNESCO provean la capacidad para enfrentar no solamente los escenarios de cambio climático, sino también los impactos no predecibles de eventos como los huracanes. Siguiente, por favor. Y también es crucial la relación que existe entonces con nuestros objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, estas metas que tenemos claves en el planeta, y aquí solamente para mostrar la relación entre 2 de estos objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. El objetivo 13 y el 14, el que tiene que ver con nuestra vida marina y el que tiene que ver con el cambio climático. Y si se dan cuenta, si logramos manejar el cambio climático con la adaptación basada en ecosistemas y con la mitigación basada también en ecosistemas, no solamente reduciremos la vulnerabilidad, sino que incrementaremos la resiliencia, reduciremos también las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, pero sobre todo esto va a depender de la forma como planifiquemos nuestras áreas marinas y costeras, cómo logremos regular los usos y cómo logremos entender los límites que tienen nuestros ecosistemas. Siguiente, por favor. Siguiente. Y aquí para mostrarles un ejemplo con Vida Manglar. Vida Manglar, el nombre lo pone el grupo comunitario que hace parte de esta iniciativa. Es una iniciativa exitosa de carbono azul. Hoy hemos logrado articular el conocimiento científico con el conocimiento tradicional, puesto aquí en la práctica, pero además una alianza de múltiples actores que están contribuyendo a que haya también una alianza entre el sector público y el sector privado. Hemos logrado que esta biodiversidad sea preservada, que hoy empecemos a restaurar parte de esos ecosistemas de manglar que venían siendo afectados, y ha logrado ser certificado como un área de carbono azul. En este momento es el primero a nivel mundial que se certifica con el estándar BERRA, que es el de carbono verificado y cambio climático, biodiversidad y comunidades locales. Esta experiencia piloto es replicable a otras áreas y a otros sitios. Se da en un área marina protegida, es decir, completamente compatible con las áreas también de la UNESCO. Siguiente, por favor. Y aparecen nuevas preguntas de investigación, por supuesto. Las otras preguntas de investigación tienen que ver con asuntos emergentes, como por ejemplo los pastos marinos. También los venimos trabajando en el Caribe colombiano, en esa reserva de biosfera Seaflower, y los invito a leerse este reporte que pongo acá en pantalla. También esas preguntas sobre si los cambios de marea están causando exportación del carbono hacia los océanos, pues porque vemos que la captura en suelos es menor que en las áreas donde hay micromareas. Y por supuesto el trabajo fuerte con el sector privado. Logramos hacer un área marina protegida con corales de profundidad en el Caribe gracias al trabajo con las compañías de oil and gas. Siguiente, por favor. Y para finalizar, quiero dejar unos mensajes claves. Y esos mensajes claves tienen que ver con esa resiliencia del océano. Siguiente. Esa resiliencia del océano, otro clic, ajá, gracias, tiene que ver con lograr lidiar con ese cambio climático. Para lidiar con ese cambio climático necesitamos mantener esos servicios ecosistémicos, conservarlos, y está esta meta de llegar al 30% para el año 2030. Pero además no es solamente la biodiversidad, es también la diversidad cultural de todos estos sitios. Esto será posible si logramos generar y mejorar las capacidades a nivel global, regional y nacional requeridas para entender estos sitios, para manejarlos con nuevas tecnologías, nuevos datos y nueva información, que ayude además a diseminar el mensaje a la gente joven, a nuevos modelos de gobernanza, a trabajar de la mano con las comunidades locales en un balance de género y con gente joven involucrada. Estas capacidades pueden ayudarnos a tomar acción ahora. Ya tenemos muchas siglas: adaptación basada en ecosistemas, nuevos conceptos, manejo integrado de zonas costeras, en fin, hay múltiples conceptos. Yo creo que ahora es hora de parar de generar muchos más de estos conceptos que a veces no estamos aplicando en su totalidad e iniciar acciones con esas personas en lo local que ya desarrollan cosas, que ya toman acción, pero además con los datos existentes en la ciencia, como los que nos presentan el IPBES y el IPCC. Siguiente. Siguiente y siguiente, gracias. Esa resiliencia en los océanos va a generar co-beneficios y además nos va a permitir que el conocimiento tradicional, el conocimiento científico y las alianzas entre múltiples actores públicos y privados nos lleven a tomar acción. Esta es la década de la ciencia de los océanos, esta es la década de la restauración de nuestros ecosistemas. No hay otro planeta azul, este es nuestro plan A y nuestro único plan. Hay que tomar acción ahora. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Paula Cristina, for an excellent presentation on our planet ocean. Very inspiring talk, and thank you for sharing as well the challenges that we face, but also opening up the opportunities for all of us. Greatly appreciated. Thank you, and I do hope our dear ambassadors and excellencies are also following on and will take home some of the recommendations that you put forward of protecting the planet ocean. Thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Paula Cristina. We have a couple of questions in the questions and answers, and we'll come back to that later on. Excellencies, dear participants, we are now going to move to the ministerial segment of this session, which is part 2. And I would like to introduce our ministerial high-level dialogue who are joining us. So my apologies, I should have introduced myself as well. I am Shamila Nair-Beduel, the Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences at UNESCO, based here in Paris. Once again, gives me great pleasure and warm welcome to all of you for joining us in this very unusual session, which is called Coping with Environmental Challenges, Climate Biodiversity Action in UNESCO Sites. These are all of UNESCO sites, but we're also looking at case studies, examples, initiatives coming from different parts and regions of the world. So this ministerial dialogue, which is part 2 of the session, actually focuses on climate action and global policies, the role and responsibility of G20 and small island developing states. I would like to invite our ministerial dialogue participants to join us in discussing the responsibility of the G20 and the small island developing states. Our first speaker with us here today is the State Minister of the Maldives, Your Excellency, Honorable Dr. Minister Dr. Abdullah Nasir. Thank you for joining us, Minister of State for Environment, Climate Change and Technology. You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, yes, Your Excellency. Please go ahead, Minister.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I would like to bring in the case of the Maldives here into this presentation. The coral reef biodiversity dependent nations within the states, the small island developing states, are the most vulnerable to climate change, mainly due to their small sizes, lack of resources, and their geographic features, special geographic features and characteristics. We are not only confronted with the projected rises in sea level and associated weather events, storms, and wave action, but also with the loss of corals, the building blocks of coral reefs, and the very existence of our nations. The loss of corals to bleaching is directly attributed to global warming and increased sea surface temperatures. There is unrefuted evidence that the oceans are warming up around the world, and that coral reefs are the most affected of marine ecosystems due to this warming. And we are seeing massive losses of corals and coral reef habitats and their associated biodiversity due to mass coral bleaching, which has become a common phenomenon around the world. Excellencies, the Maldives is a large ocean state, totally dependent on marine biodiversity. Tuna fisheries and coral reef-based tourism are the mainstay of our economy. Both these industries are directly dependent on healthy reefs. The bait fish, for example, which is an integral part of the way we fish for tunas, is collected from coral reefs. Without healthy reefs, healthy populations of tuna fisheries will be adversely affected. Tourists who visit the Maldives to experience its underwater beauty and diversity of species will also be affected. The reef building corals on a reef, which creates coral reef islands, also keep them protected from wave action. It is the complexity of the reef habitats around a coral reef island which affords physical protection to the islands. When corals die due to bleaching and other climate-related events, islands erode and make them unlivable in some instances. Communities living on these reef islands have to face enormous hardships, and governments are constantly struggling to find solutions to climate-related impacts. Loss of corals mean loss of habitats, loss of fish habitats, loss of fisheries, loss of many other ecosystems and ecosystem services on a reef. Excellencies, there is very little we can do ourselves at a national level to reverse climate change. We depend on global actions to contribute and honor climate agreements and targets, especially those that reduce emissions and keep the global temperature increases below 1.5 degrees Celsius. For coral reefs to survive, coral reef biodiversity loss is real and evident from many studies. Some studies have already reported that many species of corals may have already perished and lost to recent bleaching events. We need to conduct urgent research and globally representative studies to verify the real losses of biodiversity, of coral reef biodiversity due to climate-related coral reef habitat degradation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we in the Maldives are fully aware of the dilemma we are faced with. We cannot afford large-scale loss of coral reef habitats and marine biodiversity. We are taking measures to reduce human impacts on reefs through a number of policy interventions. We have an ambitious plan to protect and conserve as much coral reef area as possible through marine protected areas. We believe that it's only through such local conservation efforts that we can increase the resilience of reefs and reef-dependent island communities. We have already protected more than 70 coral reef sites, covering more than 10% of our coral reef area of our reefs, and we continue to do more. The UNESCO Biatoll Biosphere Reserve, established in 2011, have become a great role model for atoll conservation in the Maldives and reef conservation in the Maldives. In the last 10 years since the Biosphere Reserve was established, we've been able to demonstrate the benefits of conservation and management to island communities in Bar Atoll, to demonstrate how they can benefit from biodiversity conservation. And based on the Bar Atoll experience, we've already established last year 2 more UNESCO Biosphere Reserves in Addu Atoll and Formula Island in the Maldives. So we have examples to prove that conservation indeed of atolls and establishing them as biosphere reserves works, and we have lessons to learn from the last 10 years. It is a strategic decision of the government to protect representative reef habitats in this manner from each and every one of the 21 atolls in the Maldives. The pandemic has made us realize the importance of nature-based solutions and biodiversity conservation for the sustenance of island communities. We have seen the importance of fisheries and farming and the need for sustainable management of marine resources. Our government is committed to biodiversity conservation in our recovery and resilient plans already. Excellencies, marine plastic pollution needs to be addressed globally to make our natural systems more resilient. Small island nations in the middle of large oceanic expanses are hotspots for marine plastic pollution, and the Maldives is no exception. With high-level commitment, we have launched a single-use plastic phase-out plan in the Maldives this year. Our plan is to phase out much of single-use plastics by 2023, contributing to and reversing the trends in marine plastic pollution, thereby reversing biodiversity losses from anthropogenic sources. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I can say that it is with our concerted efforts only that we can reverse the continuing trends on biodiversity loss and climate change. We strongly believe that with high-level political commitment globally, we can consolidate individual national plans into actions to make our world a better place for the current and future generations. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Nasir. Thank you for sharing with us the experience from the Maldives and especially the role of biodiversity conservation, preservation, impacts of climate change that a small island is facing. Thank you for joining us here today, Honorable Minister, and thank you for sharing your experiences with us. We greatly appreciate. Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to our second speaker in this ministerial dialogue, and I have great pleasure to invite Your Excellency, Dr. Melania Brenes Monge, who is the Vice Minister for Education from Costa Rica. Dr. Monge is also has a PhD in education from University of Almeria in Spain, and she has been the Executive Director of Professional Development Institute for Ministry of Public Education. I thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Melania. The floor is yours, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation. Costa Rica is a country that places a great importance of climate education and in advancing in a healthy and harmonious relationship with the planet. Costa Rica is a small country in the Central of America with an extensive territorial sea. It has more than 5% of the world's biodiversity. 50% of the Costa Rican territory is covered by natural ecosystems. It conserves more than 27% of its territory under its systems of protected areas. In Costa Rica, The protection of the environment is a particularly important issue for the development and the economy of the country, especially for the following main reasons: renewable conformation of the energetic matrix, use of ecosystem services, ecotourism activity as one of our main economical activities, extension of the marine area, and institutional scaffolding on resource management. With the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, the country has developed interinstitutional and intersectoral instruments to achieve the goals of SDG, for example, our National Biodiversity Strategy 2016-2025, our national policy for sustainable consumption and production, our national urban development policy, our national decarbonization plan, and our national wastewater sanitation policy. For those countries who are interested in developing an action plan in terms of educational for sustainable development, our first advice is to place education for sustainable development in the central axis of education policy and curriculum development policy. Once this has the relevance in the educational vision, the system as a whole must assume the necessary action plans to make it possible in the classroom and therefore in the lives of students. Costa Rica has a long history of initiatives in the educational system to promote education for sustainable development, from the vision of the environmental conservation defined in the center of the political constitution of the nation. Based on that, in 2016, the Higher Council of Education in Costa Rica requested the authorities to formulate an educational policy for sustainable development and its respective action plan, both approved in 2020. As part of the hopes and ambitions of the country in the field, Costa Rica, for example, has the key intention of strengthening the maximum this educational policy that promotes the development of sustainable development citizenship with the environment, society, and the economy through specific educational processes, to pursue an important change in curricular approaches, in pedagogical practices, in permanent training, in students' activity, and in the educational management of schools, through participatory methodologies for the adoption of actions for the benefit of sustainable development. To incorporate fundamental issues of sustainable development into educational processes and discussion with the students, such as biodiversity, climate change education, comprehensive risk management, cultural diversity, poverty reduction, gender equality, health promotion, sustainable lifestyles, responsible consumption and production, among others. To encourage among the members of the educational community, for example, students, teachers, advisors, an idea of development that it counters the needs of the present time without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. To contextualize the ministerial model of education for sustainable development to each school and its members. To learn to live and coexist in peace and harmony with oneself, with the others, and with nature as a sustainable way of life. Consistent with the policy, then it seeks to orient efforts to develop activities in the following areas. For example, in terms of curriculum, we have to assure the presence of the sustainable development approach in every study plan for each educational cycle. To develop resources and educational content that support the expected curricular approach. To incorporate the sustainability approach in the Nation Decree of Student Science Fairs, for example, that we held annually in the country. In terms of students' participation, to updating of students' participation programs, for example, our ecological blue flag, our marine education program, our education for integral management of solid waste in schools, to develop a conceptual framework of the official student community service that we have all around the country based on sustainable development, to maintain and expand cooperation in participation programs, such as programs that are already important in the educational systems, for example, Water Watchers program, category of schools of the country carbon neutrality program. And in terms of teacher training, of course, we will have to proceed with teacher professional development programs aligned with the educational policy for sustainable development, teacher seminars and academic exchange options to develop better methodological practices in the field. And finally, and most important, basing the school management system in the goals of sustainable development, fortifying the participation of schools in environmental management programs, and to develop official tools and procedures to guide environmental management actions. As countries, our commitment is to follow all these goals and, of course, to implement it in action plans that actually obtain goals in our educational systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Melania, for sharing with us the initiatives undertaken by the government of Costa Rica, especially promoting education for sustainable development from schools through to adults and throughout the community. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being with us here today. And we have taken notes and we will revert back to you during the question and answer as we go along. Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. Thank you. We're now going to move on to another colleague and partner with us. And our next speaker is going to be Mr. Ottavio Di Bella, who is the Deputy Chair of the G20 Environment Deputies meeting. And Dr. Ottavio Di Bella is an Italian lawyer, graduated from Sapienza University of Rome. He's also the Deputy Chair of the G20, as I said, Environment Deputies meeting, and will be able to share with us some of the highlights on behalf of the Ministry of Ecological Transition in Italy. Thank you, Mr. Ottavio Di Bella. Thank you for joining us. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much, Madam Director. I hope you can hear me good. Let's say,
yes, please.
I hope everything. Great.
Thank you.
So I thank you. I thank you for inviting me in this session. I thanks all the excellencies being here in this very interesting dialogue on climate action, global policies, and especially I found very interesting. This just to a short introduction. Also, my previous intervention, namely the one related to IPBES and the report which was lately published along with IPBES and IPCC. So let's talk a second about the G20. As you know, we have two. So I want to give you first a glance about how the G20 works and the way we are setting it as Italian presidency. As you know, we have two different tracks. One is related to the environment, and that the deputy chair about it. The other one is about climate and energy. Let's say that in any case, a common line about the two events which will be held at the end of this month in Naples is the need for a more global and coordinated approach to address global crisis. Let's say we, both as environment and as climate, we located some priorities. We want to, let's say, we want to influence and also attract the attention of the major economies. You know, 2021 is a very particular year about the global agenda, and we are very thankful to UNESCO to be one of the major actors in it, because it's a year of where we have to establish the need to building better after the COVID-19 crisis, and this we should do with most regard about the way we approach to our natural resources and to our to the nature. So let's say that to have just a very quick glance about the G20 environment, Italy is collecting the attention of the major economies in several fields, going from the MBS and the need to consider the climate change crisis and biodiversity loss crisis as interconnected, as also Professor Portner mentioned at the very beginning of this session. At the same time, we want to stress I want to propose also some tools and some solution. We want also to stress about I want to also propose a call for action about sustainable water management, about the need to reinforce and to reach agreement on the ocean and seas. Of course, consider this is G20 is a political process, so what we can do now is to try to help to reach consensus within international fora and within the decision we have to make as international community in the months ahead within the major conference of parties. I think, of course, as far as I am immediately ready to the COP15 in Kunming and the global biodiversity framework, which should be adopted in order to establish the targets for the next decades. What rest of next decades. Other major challenges we decided to let's say focus the G20 countries' attention is related to the marine plastic litter initiative. Of course, we are doing this also in a sort of continuity with the previous experience of G20. You know, G20 is a framework which is let's see more free, less structured than the usual fora, so we can let's say consider different topics to be dealt inside, and we can propose also different solutions to be investigated in this high-level panel. Another issue will be the sustainable and circular resource uses, and we'll go also through topics related to the circular cities, also education capacity building, and green finance and blue finance. We try to explore several areas which can be helpful to push forward the international community agenda. Now, what I would like to do, because you say that we are partners, indeed, Italy and UNESCO are partners since many decades, but lately, in the past December, we undescribed an ad hoc agreement also somehow, which is very current, because which is very of current importance, also as I can detect from the question raised by many participants, because it is meant to empower the multi-decades experience of UNESCO with the designated sites and to try to provide support and to boost this need of capacity building, which was lastly recommended at UNEA 5.1 at least. So the idea is to establish a sort of an international environmental expert network. Italy launched this initiative by launching this cooperation agreement with UNESCO, and which is, let's say, takes into account the fact that climate change and biodiversity loss are of course devastating for natural ecosystem, habitats, and natural cultural heritage. But at the same time, they are some two interconnected crises which should be approached with some initiative, boots on the ground, as UNESCO does since 40, 50 years, thanks to its experience in this program. This UNESCO International Environmental Expert Network is born, is a program which is open to other countries, and we are relaunching it. So far it's funded by Italy, but we are relaunching this initiative at international level with the major economies who will be willing to join us. The idea is to provide a technical support and training to the staff of UNESCO designated sites. In this point of view, we consider the need to go into the local authority and local managers. So we'll deal with the managers of World Heritage Site, Biosphere Reserve, geoparks. Also, as I saw in some comments, to provide support also to the protected areas which are at the center of the intangible heritage, cultural heritage recognized by UNESCO. So the idea is to use all these network excellence of UNESCO to boost support and to boost initiative on the ground for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecological restoration in the system. This is, let's say, a way to concretely try to contribute even with the Paris Climate Agreement, and also to try to already going on with a post-2020 global biodiversity framework agenda. Let's say the idea is also, basically is to focus on capacity building activities, but at the same time to increase the level of knowledge about these sites, and especially to, let's say, sharing the good practice and solution amid the different sites and elements that UNESCO recognized so far. So this network, how does it work? There will be a sort of call that will be collecting all the best experts in the world and in touch with what are the current advisory bodies of UNESCO. I think about IUCN mostly, but other scientific committees supporting the activities of the organization. And this expert will work on some dedicated sites year by year, because it's a multi-year program, to provide support and to provide management solution, but also technical support, basically. The idea, of course, is to be the stakeholder, but especially the beneficiaries of the initiative will be the designated sites. This, as I mentioned before, means managers, but not only managers, means also local communities, ILCs, basically, as the international agreement dictionary teaches us. But there will be the very first beneficiaries and partners. Training capacity sharing workshop will be also conducted, of course, with local actors, along with the other initiative carried on by UNESCO. I think about the Regional Postgraduate Training School of Integrated Management of Tropical Forests and Lands. Then the idea is to present all these activities during the major events, which are the major decision events, which are during the World Heritage Committee, all the decisory session of UNESCO, so in order to keep all these experience together. So this is a kind of a tool I wanted to illustrate to you, to give you the touch that with the G20 presidency would like to propose some operational tools and concrete experiences, because on one side we want to take the legacy of the G20, which other countries already inherited us. I think about the global initiative with UNCCD. I think about the Marine Lister initiative carried on by the Japanese government. At the same time, would like also to add some other instruments to be carried on for the years ahead in the G20. And this is, of course, the idea, of course, then is to try to push forward an agenda which is not only about principle and general approaches, but it's also with concrete initiative which can be carried on for the next year. I guess I talked enough, and I guess it's time to give the floor to other participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ottavio Di Bella, for highlighting to us the importance of the G20, the engagement of Italy, but especially the role of the G20 for climate change action. And thank you also for highlighting this exceptional partnership between UNESCO and the government of Italy, and especially the launch of the first ever International Environmental Experts Network, an initiative put forward by the government of Italy in partnership with UNESCO. And we do look forward for other partners also joining this unique environmental experts network to provide support to this over 2,000 sites across the world. Thank you very much for joining us here today. And we look forward to some ambitious commitments as well and engagements coming out of the G20. And I guess the whole world is watching the G20 climate action. Thank you very much, Mr. Ottavio Di Bella. Thank you for joining us and sharing with us these really important initiatives undertaken by the government of Italy. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, we now move to our last speaker for this session, who is Ms. Beverly Wade, World Heritage Focal Point from Belize. Ms. Beverly Wade is a policy and planning advisor in the newly established innovative Ministry of the Blue Economy and Civil Aviation. She has been involved in fisheries and oceans management for the last 27 years. She's a national focal point and World Heritage Sites in Belize since 2013. Ms. Beverly, the floor is yours. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Good morning and good evening. If you allow me, I will just switch off my video while I share a quick presentation to allow for it to be projected smoothly. Excellent. So it is my pleasure, as I said before, to be a part of this most distinguished panel and to allow us to share some of our experiences in Belize, especially as it relates to some of the extraordinary work that we've been doing within our World Heritage Sites to build our resiliency in our barrier reef system and to reduce some of the vulnerabilities that are being faced from climate change and other threats. Next slide, please. So Belize has currently approximately over 23% of its territorial waters under protection. And of that 23%, we have the Belize Barrier Reef Reserve System, which is our World Heritage Site, which is really a cluster site of 7 areas. Next slide, please. Next slide. Over the years, we have put in place a very, that's okay, we could go back. I think we skipped a slide, sorry. Over the years, we have achieved key accomplishments and we have put into place key actions which have created a framework for sustainable use, for resiliency, and for increased health of our coral reef system. We have enacted a new and modern Fisheries Resources Act in 2020, along with a National Fisheries Policy, Strategy and Action Plan, an integrated coastal zone management plan with regional guidelines that is really a planning framework for national action to facilitate improved management of our coastal and marine ecosystems so as to maintain their integrity while ensuring the delivery of ecosystem services to benefit in perpetuity present and future generations of Belizeans. We have looked at putting in specific legislation which speaks to coral health. We have totally banned the commercial fishing or all take of important grazers on our reef system, such as our parrotfish. We've rolled out an innovative spatial approach to sustainable use of our fisheries resources and secure tenureship that empowers fishers and managers to collaborate and to steward and protect our resources. We have created adaptive management plans for our primary fisheries to ensure long-term sustainability and to ensure population health. We have an expansion of our marine and reserve network to now increase the total no-take areas within that 23% and of our national waters to 10%. And we have updated our mangrove regulations and environmental impact assessment regulations specifically to have guidelines which speaks directly to the World Heritage Sites. We have a moratorium on offshore oil exploration, and we have been working to create a regime in place which speaks now to bring value to our fisheries product more so than to have a production-based a fishery industry that's just based on production, but to bring value adding and to bring value to the important measures and that we have put into place along with our fishing community. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I just wanted to touch very quickly on some of the specific actions that we have been doing within our World Heritage sites. One of them is we have been working with our coral reef restoration program that is community-centered. We have embarked on training over 70 Belizeans from various areas within communities, from tour guides to community members to scientists to regulators. We have worked now with 26 nurseries in our 7 MPAs and along the main barrier reef system. And we have outplanted approximately 158,000 corals along our system. We have seen from our coral reef restoration programs, especially in our World Heritage site, live coral increased from 6% to over 50% over the last 10 years, with survival rates of over 89% from hurricane and from warming of the waters. And we have experienced spawning in all 3 replenished aquaporid taxas, which, as you all know, are important reef building species. We have also worked on the eradication of invasive species within our World Heritage sites and have put in place biosafety management plans for them. We have also worked with population control of invasive species such as the lionfish in Belize, and we have currently in place a lionfish management plan, which speaks to the control of that species and incentivize exploitation of that species. Next slide. Next slide. So one of the important actions and initiatives that have helped Belize to realize a number of these important areas have been a very important partnership that we initiated with the UNESCO World Heritage Marine Program and key stakeholders from the NGO community such as IUCN, WWF, and national stakeholders such as government, community leaders, and also the actual users of the resources. In 2009, our Belize Barrier Reef system was placed on the list of site in danger. And so there was a concerted effort to put into place a desired state of conservation in 2016. And this resulted in key achievements. As I mentioned before, it resulted in improved protection of our mangroves. And just recently in February of this year, all the remaining national lands in our World Heritage site have now been designated as strict mangrove reserves. It has also looked at the adaptation of our coastal zone management plan, as mentioned earlier, with specific plans as to what type of developments and standards are suitable for various coastal areas, including those areas within the World Heritage site. Next slide. We also looked at our environmental impact regulations, and we also updated those impact regulations to have specific guidelines as developed under the Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan, but to also have guidelines that were also specific to development that would have happened within our World Heritage sites. Next slide. And as a global leader in marine conservation, Belize is also focused on developing cutting-edge solutions for long-term resistance planning. And we are proud to partner with, again, the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, the UNESCO World Heritage Marine Program, TNC, Reef Resilient Network, and a number of other important stakeholders in an initiative that is geared towards World Heritage sites globally. And it's the Resilience Reef Initiative, which is an initiative that is committed to working with sites to develop resilience strategy that directly responds to site core challenges and integrates resilience into the site management processes. Next slide. So Belize is one of the 5 World Heritage Coral Reef sites which was selected under this new reef resilience program. And it is an initiative which would catalyze a global network of resilience leaders across these 5 sites, including Belize, to develop and pilot a program for resilience-based management. The resilience strategy will set a bold vision for the future, and it's expected that it will be innovative, integrated in its thinking, and will prioritize implementing local short and long-term solutions that would directly address reef and the reef community's vulnerabilities. And so Belize, along with the other 4 sites that have been selected for this project, it is expected that these strategies would then serve as best practices over time that could be now rolled out to the other marine sites. Next slide. And so I just wanted to thank you for including us in this panel today to just talk about some of the key initiatives that we have on the ground in Belize that are looking at building our resiliency to climate change and other natural disasters, and to highlight some of our successes that we have realized in Belize. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beverly Wade, and congratulations to Belize for these very innovative approaches of building reef community resilience. Thank you. I would like to appeal to our translators if they could please give us 10 minutes so that we could have our 2 youth who have been anxiously waiting to join us. Is it okay to have probably 8 minutes from our translators, please, if you could bear with us? Thank you very much to our interpreters. Greatly appreciate this, enabling us to communicate with one another. And excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, youths are real agents of change. And in the spirit of intergenerational solidarity and equity, UNESCO holds great importance to the voice of youth. We have 2 youth with us here today, Rebecca Leibish from Mount Elgon Biosphere Reserve in Kenya, and Gabriela Martinez, who is an environmental activist and speaker, and she is from Ecuador. Both of them represent the MAB Youth Networks, that is UNESCO's Man and Biosphere networks from 2 different parts of the world, that is Africa and Latin America. So I'll first give the floor to Rebecca. I'm sorry, Rebecca, but you have 3 minutes, please, to share with us your ideas and thoughts of the youth-led community-based organizations where you are. You have 3 minutes, please. Thank you, Rebecca. Over to you.
Thank you very much for having me today. It is such an honor. Can you
increase the volume, please, Rebecca? Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Am I audible enough? Yeah, so I'm saying it's such an honor to be part of this great initiative and movement by different stakeholders who are advocating for climate justice and biodiversity conservation. I'm Rebecca Lebich from AfriMAB Youth Network. I'm the spokesperson for Africa in the celebration of MAB at 50 years. And I can say that youths are critical to the conservation of biodiversity and climate change as a whole. And through some of the activities I can just mention is some of the activities that we are doing to just make sure that we are being part of the change that the country and the world is yearning for. Currently, we are creating awareness. We are just trying to create awareness to ensure that we can simplify the science knowledge to the knowledge whereby a local and indigenous person, a youth, and women and indigenous group can be able to understand. Because actually, we do not need to have the information gaps that will prevent the understanding of the key messages that we want to push and pass out to the country as a whole in matters conservation of biodiversity. Another activity that we are doing is actually to just ensure that we are advocating for environmental policies that are friendly and that can favor the commitment and the role of youth in the involvement of conservation, because as we all know, the youths are critical towards the conservation of biodiversity as a whole. Also, we believe that it's very critical to have youths as decision makers, because there are those policies that if we are given an opportunity to raise our voices, we can be able to ensure that we are being part of the solution in actually advocating for climate justice and biodiversity conservation. Because of the little time that I've been given, I wouldn't be able to mention a lot, but I'll just want to say thank you very much for this session, because we have had an engaging session, and I believe we have also learned from you just as much as you are ready to learn from us. Thank you for that.
Rebecca, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you also for your patience and your understanding that we're running out of time. Rest assured that all of the presentations will be up on the UNESCO website, and we may also start a small chat group for people to exchange with one another. So thank you very much, Rebecca. I'd like to give the floor very quickly to Gabriela Martinez, our representative from the Ecuador and the Latin American MAB Youth Network. Gabriela, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Maybe if we could share the last part of my presentation, because we don't have enough of time. Okay, I'm a part of the UNESCO during the 2015 and 2016. Well, this is the first slide. As you can see, as COVID continues to strike our health, our livelihoods, and our futures, during this 2021 is currently forecast to be the year with the second highest emission rise ever. Next, maybe if you can share the last slides, please. I'm a part, how I said, I'm a part of the two youth network created by or in line with the Sustainable Development Strategy for Youth created by UNESCO. And well, I will say that we need to work together, support together. We as youth, we believe that a crucial way to achieve transformative change is through integrate transformative education of biodiversity, climate change, sustainable and cultural heritage in school curricula at all levels, and promoting it in formal, non-formal, and informal education, as well as by fostering intergenerational learning and interdisciplinary collaboration and exchange. If we better understand with vast and exciting opportunities that focus on climate education and green jobs, we can foster a new generation of leaders. I'll say my last, before this one, we need to work together. We need more time in this presentation. I was prepared my presentation for this moment, but we can continue to be part of the last presentations. We need to be not actor like a theater. We need to be actively and put it in all the agendas with UNESCO. We need your support to work together in order to facilitate our jobs. We, with our strong-led commitments and with a strong-led youth power and beliefs and souls and thoughts and brains, we create and mobilize a new West, especially the youth-led environmental action gained significant public attention during these years. Whether through educational advocacy on direct policy engagement, you people played a crucial role in shaping and enacting responsible environmental protection and climate policies around the globe. Indigenous youth, in particular, on the front lines on the climate crisis, have held the longest role in advocating for environmental action. That's why I say Thank you to UNESCO to promote this youth involved with the Math Youth Global Network and the newest youth network created in the COP25 named UK. We, young people representing different causes, constituencies, social backgrounds, ethnicities, genders, geographies, and language, from local, regional to global levels, are coming together to call for unprecedented action with and for nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabriela and Rebecca. We have taken note on your plea that you would like to be at the forefront, and rest assured that in future meetings, we will give you the floor first to speak. Our sincere apologies that we run out of time, but I want to say congratulations to both of you. Rebecca, for the Africa Map Network, thank you for all your hard work and your good work in Africa and making change. And also to Gabriela, who actually lives in the Galapagos Biosphere Reserve. Thank you for your excellent work and leading the Youth UNESCO Climate Action Network, UCAN. Thank you for joining us today, and congratulations on your excellent work. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is really important for us at UNESCO to listen to you and to bring you all together in this type of a format. Of course, biodiversity and climate change are strongly interlinked. They go hand in hand, and we need to organize more dialogues like this and share ideas and thoughts, experiences, best practices across the world. As stated in the IPCC IBES co-sponsored event, we must stop the loss and the degradation of carbon and species-rich ecosystems. But for that, we need all on board. We need the policymakers, but we also need our youth, because they are the voice of the future. And this is the declaration of UNESCO, which was declared in 1997 at the 29th General Conference, which is called The Responsibilities of Present Generations Towards Future Generations. And the goals are really in line with the Earth Charter and the protection of the environment, preservation of cultural diversity, cultural heritage, and natural heritage is at the top of our agenda. So we look forward to working with you. UNESCO's unique global network of designated sites are important models for building resilience to climate change and reconciling people with nature. And I'd seen a question that came on that asked, how are we all working together? Well, by accelerating local solutions through participatory governance, combination of the natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, education, culture, and communication, we can work together. And there was another question that, and we will share the questions with all of you. We will make all of this recording available on our site. Please use it and feel free to come back to us with ideas and especially innovative approaches of how we can work together as a community to protect our biodiversity from the climate impacts. And I also just want to share one thought for the road. While there is a global movement of 30-30 in protecting the Earth's territory by 30%, I think it's very important and we at UNESCO, we have already protected 5 to 6% through our designated sites. But rather than having 30% protected of the Earth, why not we have 100% responsible people? So that's the aim. All of us, 100% responsible for the oceans and for the Earth and for life on Earth. So with that, I would like to thank you very much. We really need to take science-based actions into play at all levels. I thank our scientists. I thank the distinguished speakers, the ministers, dear delegates, dear colleagues, all of you who have joined us from across the world, dear participants and experts, and dear youth. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Stay safe and look forward to welcoming your home to UNESCO in presencia sometime. Thank you very much, and thank you to the HLPF for giving us a chance to present to you how countries are coping with environmental challenges and what UNESCO can offer in its programs and designated sites. Living in harmony with nature and our coalition with nature and for nature. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much, and stay safe.